Is in this room. We've got to work together to make whether we the team that we can be. Stop it. Throw it to the end zone for Robinson and a touchdown.
We come to practice, we practice hard. We take it, we be optimistic, and we gonna win games, bro.
All right. Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Big Douglas Show. It's a Friday, so we're getting closer to Inside the Command Center time. My guest today is the host of the Kevin Sheehan Show, Kevin Sheehan. Kevin, how are you, buddy?
What's up, Doug? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Let's start with this. Where were you at before the season started? Where are you kind of now?
On what? The team?
Yeah, just what you thought. Yes, what you thought.
I
this
mean,
thing could be.
I figured a game above or below 500, and I think that's what we're watching right now. You know, I thought, you know, the over under in Vegas, which was 6.5, was a little bit low. I thought this was a 7, 8, 9 win team, and I think they'll get there probably. I mean, here's the thing we've learned about Ron. No matter what we think about him, his teams never bail on him. They always put together a run, you know, at some point mid to late season. And I would expect that they'll play some good football at some point and, you know, go from 3 to 7 or 8, something like that.
Well, they to your point, they always win 7. They were right. They were going to always
won 8 last
win
year.
7.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to always at least win 7 this year because that's what they do.
Right.
Where are you at? I mean, what are you expecting for the rest of the season now with everything in flux, I suppose?
I mean, I'm expecting from, you know, sort of a consumer standpoint to read a lot about what Josh Harris is working on at some point, you know, who's consulting him, what kind of general manager he's looking for. At some point in December, I bet we start to hear some names on who the new general manager will be. Some head coaching names will be floating around. You know, this year, this time last year, we were like, well, who's going to buy the team? You know, that was part of the focus. Now it's going to be about this reset. The reset was always going to be early 2024. They didn't have enough time to do what they wanted to do when they bought the team end of July, early August, because the team was going to camp. You know, they had preseason games 2 weeks away. And I think that we're going to see major changes, and we'll hear that. As far as the team on the field, like I just said, wouldn't surprise me at all because Ron does one thing better than anything else. He keeps teams engaged, keeps them, you know, believing. And we've seen that they have the ability to play pretty good football. You know, they played a very good game last week offensively. We've also seen that they've got the ability to play pretty poor football like the week before. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of just the roller coaster ride, the up and down ride, the rest of the way that we've had through the first 8.
Do you agree with me? I've long said I doubt there'll be any changes in season. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do anything in season. It's possible, you know, at the very end of the season, they might do something if they feel like it gives them a head start, you know, so they're ready to hire the day the season ends. The regular season ends. But no, I'm with you. I think these guys are meticulous. I think they're not impulsive. And their plan all along was to sit back, watch, you know, help when needed, like before the trade deadline. But I don't think I think actually Mitch and Josh and Magic, I think they like Ron personally. So
it's hard not to, right? I mean, when you meet him in a room.
Yeah, so I don't think they're going to do anything. And really, what would the benefit be at this point? You know, I mean, at this point, like those that believe, well, give the job to Eric Bieniemy and let's figure out whether or not he's a head coach. I think we're still trying to figure out whether or not he's an offensive coordinator. You know, last week was a great week. The week before that against New York, not so good. You know, he's admittedly said he's in the process of still trying to figure it out and learn a little bit. So I want him focused on being the best offensive coordinator and the best developer of Sam Howell the rest of the way, rather than taking on all the responsibilities of being a head coach. Which, by the way, if they did fire Ron and offer it, Eric shouldn't even take it. It's like setting him up to fail.
Well,
He's got too much on his plate.
I've said this repeatedly on the podcast. I'll ask you, if you're a fan of EB, right? When is the last time the interim head coach?
Not often does it turn into full time.
Care to guess? It's 2002 with Doug Marrone.
Is that Jaguars. Really the truth? Yeah. Wow.
It's either 2012 or 2000 until I get but yes, Doug Marrone with the Jaguars. It's happened like once in the last 20 years. So if you're an EB fan, you probably shouldn't be rooting for him to get the interim label here anyway, if that's who he wants.
I agree with that.
And I agree with you. Like, let's let him be an offensive coordinator first before you dump all kind of responsibilities. And frankly, if they got rid of Jack Del Rio, I mean, who calls the plays? Is there a guy on that staff that's called plays before?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of our fans are always in a rush. They're in a rush to declare Sam Howell the franchise quarterback. They're in a rush to declare Eric Bieniemy, the next head coach. And both of those people are going through a new experience. I mean, Sam's never quarterbacked in the NFL, not to mention he's in a new offense than the one he was in last year. And Eric has never had this level of responsibility as a coordinator. Let's let it play out. It's been up and down. It's been a roller coaster through the first 8 weeks. Last week was great. It would be great to see, an evening out of more, consistency on the good side. There's been a lot of good. There's probably been more good than bad, but it's a process, and they're only 8 games into one season.
If indeed this is Rivera's last hurrah, how will you remember him here in Washington?
Average. Everything he did was average, and a totally different coach than the guy that coached at Carolina, in part because he had so much more responsibility here. But he became more of a CEO coach here, Doug, and that's not what he was at Carolina. And, people can look at the losing seasons in Carolina. They went to the playoffs like 4 out of 5 years, in a run there. He had a quarterback too, that helps. It's just been meh. And I think, a lot of the, I hate to say this about him because I think he's such a fighter, such a competitor, and you can't blame him for wanting to perhaps move on. This has been a total S show since the moment he got here, more so than he ever thought it would be, including, a battle with personal health issues.
And COVID.
Yeah, but he has, been tongue-tied and said one thing one day and another the next so many times that unfortunately I think he's worn out his welcome with everybody as well, even though deep down he's a competitor, he's a good man. There are things he's done with the culture of the organization that, didn't exist before he got here. But I think it's time for him. I bet he knows it too and might embrace it when he gets there. I don't think he'll coach again after this year.
I don't think so either. Whether it was the cancer, whether it was just a culmination of things, it doesn't feel like, to your point, he doesn't look like the same guy year one with the Redskins.
Yeah.
That he did this last year with the Commanders, much less getting you all the way back to Carolina. Do you have a preference, offensive versus defensive minded head coaches?
I'd prefer an offensive head coach.
Is that because we've done the defense a couple times?
Done the defensive. We've done the offense too. But I mean, in fact, we've only had 2 defensive minded head coaches during the Snyder era, Marty and Ron, right?
Yeah.
Right. There's Norv and Spurrier and Joe and Zorn and Jay were all offensive guys. But I just hope that they go the route of trying to find a lead football person. That person becomes, general manager, president of football operations, and we do it that way rather than hiring kind of the coach and then hiring the general manager or hiring a coach / general manager. I'd like to do it, the more traditional way. It's not the only way it's done, but it's kind of the more traditional way. and let a real football person pick the next head coach.
Is that person in the building right now? Is that how much say so and authority does the new guy Shen have in all of this?
Oh, I think he's much more on the information analytics side. He's not, a general manager necessarily. Could he be involved in a group that ends up helping to pick the
Right.
next general manager?
Right.
Maybe. But that lead football person isn't in the organization right now, in my opinion.
But it is a sign that this thing will be run much more modernly, if you will, from an
Yeah, I
analytical
mean,
standpoint.
this was the first thing that I think we all saw coming, because if you followed Josh Harris and his other teams, Sam Hinkie and Daryl Morey, major information analytics guys, and it's that kind of person that he wants to head up his football operation, and that kind of person, I would assume, would then be looking for a head coach that has the same kind of mindset. So yeah, something in the heavy analytics, heavy information driven way. I think that's what they're looking for.
Were you surprised? I mean, once it became obvious they were sellers at the deadline, I kind of thought that, particularly on defense, guys like Kendall Fuller that may have been able to bring you something back. I was surprised that, like, particularly once Tez went, I thought, man, they're just going to start selling here. Like Antonio Gibson gone, Kendall Fuller gone. Like anybody on expiring deals minus Cam Curl, I thought, why wouldn't they be gone? Were you surprised that they weren't? It sounds funny to say they weren't more active because they were the most active of the groups.
Yeah.
I still thought maybe they'd be more active.
Yeah, maybe, but it all depends on what was out there for those players too.
Sure.
I mean, it was reported that they got offered a sixth for Jacoby Brissett by the Browns. I think JP had that. I don't know why they didn't take that. I mean, I've heard about how valuable Jacoby is to Sam, and if a sixth rounder doesn't offset the value he brings for the last 9 games, and being in the building with Sam for another 2.5 months, that's fine, because apparently he is one first-rate smart guy. Brissett,
Yeah.
like, everybody loves him, and Sam loves him, and I don't think they kept him because they're anticipating playing him, but I think that he's been valuable to Sam's development. But I kind of thought, well, what's Ken Zampese and Tavita Pritchard? And, I mean, is he really, why not just unload him for the sixth? Because he's not going to be on the roster next year. But in terms of everybody else, maybe they didn't get offered anything even in the realm of considering it.
Has Ron been a better GM or head coach since he's here?
Oh, God. I mean, really? That's the choice you're giving me? I mean, he's been,
How is the
there was a
roster?
moment-
What is the state of the roster right now?
The state of the roster is they've got some good young players who are under contract. How many of them Ron brought in? It doesn't matter. He kept them. He retained them. He retained Duran. He retained John. He retained Terry. So, I look at this organization and I think it's with Dan gone, it was already going to be more acceptable to top rate candidates, either as a GM or a head coach. Dan being gone was the key to that. But more than that, they've got the third most salary cap, space entering 2024. They've got now 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. They also have some good young talent under contract. They do. Like, I know that we've been frustrated at times with, the performance on defense, or the performance from Jahan Dotson before last week. The not using of Brian Robinson Jr. as much as maybe some want. But John Allen's a really good player and a really good, guy to have in your organization. Deron Payne is an exceptional player. Cameron Curl's got a chance to be a really good player. Jamin Davis has had moments this year. I think he's continued to grow. And then on offense, Terry and Jahan, and I think Cole Turner and Sam Cosme and Brian Robinson Jr., and maybe Sam Howell. So it's a very attractive off-season destination for some of the top candidates. Like, you had to scratch the top candidates off your list previously, because anybody with a choice was never going to come to this place and work for Dan Snyder. But that's different now. So you've got a chance to attract, some of the real top tier candidates.
it's almost incredible to think that this would be a destination,
Yeah,
considering where we've been at just as recently as last year.
right.
But I think you're right. I think why wouldn't it be? There's a lot of picks and a lot of money, and the base is what does Sam got to do to show the next group you don't need to take your top 12-ish pick and take a quarterback? Or are you Kevin Sheehan of the mindset you gotta, if you have an opportunity to take a quarterback top 10, you've just got to always do that?
I mean, I think Sam has done so much that's been encouraging. And there's a lot there to like. I mean, he can really sling it. He is mobile. He's tough. He's gritty. All of those things. He's very good in the quick game. That's what his offensive coordinator told me last winter at Carolina. He said, West Coast, quick game, get it out of his hands quickly. You don't want him in pure drop back. But with all of the encouraging, there's also, concerns. And the concern is that when he does drop back, in pure drop back game, he doesn't see it. He doesn't process it. He doesn't throw it with anticipation. And because of that, he's on pace to shatter the record for sacks in a season by a quarterback, even though last week, pretty good feeling to only get out of that game with one sack, even though it was a critical one. But on that front, we need to see more progress. That's what I would say. We need to see that all the stuff we've seen that's great continues, and all of the concern areas we see improvement. And if we see improvement and it's trending in the right direction, great. But you can't play full time as an NFL starting quarterback at a high level, taking 5.5 sacks a game. Can't happen. And, I know a lot of our fans tend to brush it aside and say, so what? Did you see this throw? Did you see that throw? Yeah, but against good teams, against good defenses that scheme it up like Wink Martindale, like, by the way, this Sunday, Bill Belichick, even though they've lost some key players on defense, it's not sustainable to play where you're on your back 5 to 6 times a game, and by the way, being pressured and not seeing it another 5 to 6 times a game, even if you get rid of it. We got to see progress in those areas, but man, the things he does well, they're very encouraging.
Why is it taken? It feels like, much like on the defensive side, they get forced to do what I think a lot of us think is the right thing. This time it was on offense, on the offensive line. They were kind of forced into putting the center back in, forced into switching up things at guard. Seemed like it worked well. Now, on Tuesdays, we watched the all 22 tape. It's not, listen, it wasn't like those two guys were much, much better, but I think at least certainly the center allows you to get the calls right.
Yeah.
That Giants game was terrible, and they didn't know where the blitz was coming from. And so I'm sure that's what part of that was. Does it to you, like it does to me, feel like this group's forced into the right decision more times than not?
I don't know. I mean, on offense, it's a learning process for Eric Bieniemy. It is, and it's a new system. It's a new offense, and Tyler Larson did help with the communication. There's no doubt on Sunday. But Philadelphia, as Logan pointed out to me today on radio, they're a little bit more vanilla and a little bit easier to dissect than Wink Martindale is. I think I hope the big takeaway from the Philadelphia game, the 2 Philadelphia games, is that no matter whose fault it is, offensive line because of poor play or poor communication or receivers not getting open or Sam, the pure drop back game like we saw 14 times in the first half against the Giants defense, where he's dropping back 5 steps, consistently over and over again. We can't be stubborn on that. Like, that just doesn't work right now. There may be a day where it works for him, but it's not really what he does well. It's not what the team does well. What we saw Sunday, 3-step drop out, screen out, bubble screen out. We're sprinting them out. We're rolling them out. Those first 4 drives set the tone for the game. I mean, it got them into a rhythm. It kept Philadelphia off balance. It ended up opening up the opportunity to take some shots on sort of 1st and 10 play action, pure drop back. But we can't, I don't think they can be stubborn where they come back this week and say against Belichick, yeah, we're going to go to some, medium and long developing plays. And, you're going to end up on your back a lot, and you're going to end up losing a game that maybe you could win. Defensively, I'd like to see more of the zone matching that we saw last year. I'd like to see them be more aggressive, and they were a little bit against Philadelphia. But, Jack's defense, is not – it's sound, but it's also one that can be overly simple for a really good offense to figure out.
Let's get to the defense. I think they'll be just as good, if not better, on defense after the two big losses. Do you feel the same way?
I think one of the things they've done consistently all year, Doug, is they've been very good stopping the run. They've been a good run stopping defense. By the way, Montez had a lot to do with that too, because he really was an edge setter and a really strong run stopping DN. But, with Payne and Allen inside, we've seen James Smith-Williams play a lot and do a really good job. And Hill's obviously done a good job, especially as a rusher. I hope we see improvement defensively.
Get worse.
I don't want to see 13 out there on AJ Brown again. We don't need to see that. That was troubling. And I think they could have avoided it. I mean, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's the coverage, and he had help. But the help didn't help. This defense has been a disappointment this year. It's been a disappointment. Coverage in particular, coverage tied to rush. It's just not been good enough, consistently enough. And they've had moments. The Arizona game, they took over. They would not have beaten Arizona without their defense. The Buffalo game, I didn't think they were that bad, actually. It was the offense that was really the problem there. I thought the 3 turnovers in the Atlanta game were crucial to winning that game. But for the most part, it just hasn't been good enough. The Chicago game was super hideous. The Giant first half was bad, but, they still held them to 14 points, and got them and made them punt 8 times. But last week wasn't good. Philadelphia is going to do that to a lot of people, though.
And so is AJ Brown. They don't have any AJ Browns on this Patriots team, thank goodness.
They do not. They have no playmakers on offense.
They are lacking.
Yeah.
They are lacking on offense.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that their scheme is very good. You were mentioning something about EB, and I've said this on the podcast a bunch. It feels like sometimes he forgets that that's not Mahomes back there, and that you can't kind of run some of the same things. Where do you stand on? I mean, I think we kind of see the game a little similarly, but it's changing, and teams throw the ball like this, but we are throwing it at a outrageous rate. Yeah. Is this just a product of what the league is now, or you think this is designed to help speed Sam's process up? Like, I think it's easy to say, right? Like, no, if you want to help Sam out, you'll run the ball a whole bunch. Well, no, not really. If you're asking the kid to throw the ball 15 times a game, that's actually not helping speed up his process. It's just helping him not get shattered. Where are you on moving the process along versus this 50 outrageous dropbacks a game type deal?
Eric's not a believer in, a strong running game is a young quarterback's best friend.
And he's a running back.
That's
crazy thing.
Yeah, exactly. From a running back. I mean, he's from the Andy Reid, tree, obviously. They're throwing more than anybody in terms of ratio, pass to run ratio, number 1 in the league, at basically 3.5, almost 3.5 to 1. And I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it if that's the best way to move the football. In today's game, it's like, by the way, they're playing a team in which every week it was what will give us the best chance to move the football and score points. Is it running the football? We'll do that. If it's throwing the football, Brady will throw it 50 times. I mean, that's what they lived, doing. It was based on who they were playing. Whatever gives them the best chance to move the football and score points, I am for. I'm just not for right now. And by the way, I do think that Eric is instilling his philosophy, and he thinks that throwing Sam, into the deep end from the beginning is the right thing to do. I just think that the games in which we've had more of the pure drop back versus the quick game, that's not progress, being made. That it's almost hard at that point to get anything accomplished because you're beating your head up against a wall because Sam's just not there yet consistently enough in the pure drop back game. But everything else he does well. It's not that he hasn't completed passes in the drop back game, but that's one of the reasons that they've ended up with 41 sacks through 8 games. You know, you can't, that renders a team impotent really in these games. We saw it in the Giant game. We saw it in the Chicago game. We saw it in the Buffalo game. We saw it in the Arizona game, going back to the very beginning of the year, you know, when he was taking a bunch of sacks and they were dropping him back. But man, it looks good when when the plan is to get it out quickly, because they do have playmakers. Like that was kind of the idea that we all had at the beginning. Sam's going to be a distributor, you know. Phil Longo is offensive coordinator in Chapel Hill. Sam's a distributor. You put him in that role, he can really excel. And I think we saw that last week. We saw it against Philly.
They're 2.5 point. They're 2.5 point dogs this week. What do you kind of expect to see?
I think they can win this game. I'll never say about this team right now they should win the game, because that's what the opponent is saying when we're on the schedule. But they can win this game. You know, New England's lost key players on defense. They have no playmakers on offense. I think it's interesting because I watched a couple of the New England games this week. The Mac Jones criticism is probably a bit unfair. He really processes quickly, sees things quickly. He can throw the ball. He's got nobody to throw it to.
No.
They have nobody on offense in their skill position players. So, stop the run, which they've done a good job doing. Ramondre Stevenson can get off a little bit, but Washington's been excellent against the run. If you stop the run and you make them one-dimensional, if they can't cover this team consistently, it's going to be a long rest of the year defensively. They should have a good day defensively, I think. But I think like the key, too, is not making the big mistakes offensively, because Belichick's plan will be to provoke a young quarterback into seeing things that aren't there and making mistakes.
Yeah, they're going to roll out Tyquan Thornton and Hunter Henry and Jalen Reagor. You know what I mean? Like those are the 3 big weapons. So if they can't, to your point, if Forbes can't show that he can shut these guys down, then we're in for a long one. What the Ricky Stromberg is out. It just piles on to what had been a horrible draft class. I still am not sure I figured out what the strategy or the plan was with this last draft.
Well, I just kind of disagree on that point. I think 8 games into a rookie season, like we've all watched enough football, Doug, to evaluate a draft class 8 games into a season is just way too premature for me.
No, I guess what I'm saying is the first round pick they had is a boundary corner. They already had 2 boundary corners. They didn't have a nickel, so then they had to go get a nickel. They drafted a center that they knew they weren't planning on playing this year. They drafted a tackle, Jaden Daniels, you don't even hear his name anymore. KJ Henry doesn't dress. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that I understood the plan.
Yeah, I think the plan with a lot of the teams is to draft the best available player on your board, and especially when you're not a legitimate contender and you're still building. But I understand, where they ended up with, the players they ended up with. My point is, I far from get thrown in the towel on Emmanuel Forbes.
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I just think that process that people have been going through is like, we've all watched enough football to know it takes 2 to 3 years before you can legitimately evaluate a class. Look, Jamin Davis is a better player right now than anybody gave him a chance to be after his first 8 games his rookie year. And I'm not saying that he's justified the first round pick, but that people gave up on him 8 games. I've seen enough. He's terrible. This was a dreadful pick. And he's a good player. He's not a great player, but once they got him back to a position that made sense, I think he's an ascending player. Let me put it that way.
They're going to continue talking this weekend just because of the matchup and what's in the news about Belichick to DC. You don't want nor believe that will happen, right?
No, I don't think. Well, the want is different than the believe. I don't believe that there's any truth to it. I think this group is going to look for, as we discussed, general manager, analytics driven and, go that route. I don't really get, and I find it entertaining how a lot of the calls that I took this week, they wouldn't even consider Belichick as a coach. Like, really? You wouldn't consider Bill Belichick as a coach? It's one thing to say, I don't want him as the general manager and the coach, and I'd prefer to go a young route. I understand his greatness, but it's like, no. He's trash. He's done. He's nothing without Brady. No. Bill Belichick's one of the greatest coaches that ever lived. And if he was interested in being here as just a coach and he was motivated, I mean, that is a given that you end up with a great coach rather than there's a possibility that Josh and the group won't get it right on the next hire. But my preference actually at this point is I think the way they'll go, which is hire a real GM, real football person, believe in that person, let him make the decisions.
What about a guy? And I agree with you, and I hope that's what they do also. One last one just on the head coaching stuff. What about like a guy like Jim Harbaugh? Would that interest you? Nope. I think we lost Kevin.